I can still remember the first time I set eyes on that place, the old, abandoned asylum on the hill, standing as an eerie silhouette against the darkening sky. We had heard about it for years, of course. People in town called it St. Mercy's, though, according to rumor, Mercy was the last thing anyone found within its walls. But I wasn't really one for ghost stories, and when my friends suggested we go exploring, I laughed it off. I didn't really believe in hauntings. I thought it was just another decaying building left to be swallowed by time. But as we pulled up to the asylum that evening, I felt a shiver crawl up my spine. "Come on, Emily, don't chicken out now." Claire nudged me playfully from the front seat. Her excitement was practically contagious, but I noticed her nervous laugh. She was probably just as apprehensive as I was. Behind us, Jake and Mark chuckled, trying to act unfazed. But there was an undercurrent of unease that none of us dared to say out loud. "Who's chickening out?" I shot back, forcing a smile. But the truth was, every fiber of my being was screaming to turn back. We parked the car at the end of the overgrown road leading to the asylum. In the dim twilight, the building loomed over us, towering and oppressive. Broken windows stared back at us like hollow eyes, and the front doors hung slightly open as if welcoming us into the shadows within. I shivered involuntarily and pulled my coat closer. We grabbed our flashlights, joking and laughing a bit too loudly as we made our way up the crumbling steps and into the asylum. It felt like the building itself was breathing, each creak of wood and whisper of wind sounding like a voice from the past. I told myself it was just the cold. Just my imagination. We split up soon after, agreeing to meet back at the entrance in an hour. Jake and Mark went one way, Claire and I went the other. We ventured deeper into the asylum, taking in the peeling paint, the broken doors, the damp smell of decay. Rooms that had once held patients now lay silent, echoes of past lives hanging in the air like a thick mist. "Creepy, isn't it?" Claire whispered as we walked through the long, dark hallway. "Yeah," I admitted. "But it's just a building, right?" But even as I said it, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see something, or someone, lurking in the shadows. I knew it was irrational, but the feeling of being watched grew stronger with every step. Then, as we rounded a corner, something caught my eye, a small, tarnished plaque on the wall. It was barely legible, but I could make out the words. "Ward 3, High-Risk Patients." A chill ran down my spine. High-risk patients. The words seemed to hang in the air, cold and foreboding. I could almost imagine the people who had once been kept here, their silent screams echoing through the walls. "Let's check it out," Claire said, but her voice was barely a whisper now. We pushed open the heavy door, and a wave of stale air washed over us. The room was dark, save for a faint, sickly green glow coming from a shattered window. As I stepped inside, something in the air shifted, and I felt a strange dizziness come over me. It was like the room was changing. Claire was saying something, but her voice sounded distant, like it was coming from the other side of a thick glass wall. I tried to call out to her, but the words stuck in my throat. The room was spinning, warping around me. Shadows twisted and danced on the walls, and suddenly I was alone. alone in a different time. When I blinked, Claire was gone, and the room was filled with a strange, ghostly light. The walls looked newer, the paint unpeeled, the floor clean. It was like I had been transported back in time. I could hear faint whispers, the sound of footsteps echoing in the hallway outside. I stumbled back, panic rising in my chest. What was happening? I tried to steady my breathing, tried to focus on something, anything that made sense. But every detail seemed foreign, out of place. I saw a bed in the corner, neat and made up, a tray of medical instruments on a nearby table. The room was no longer empty, it looked like it had been left in a hurry, like someone had just stepped out. I reached for the door, my hand trembling, and pushed it open. And that's when I saw her. A young woman, her back to me, dressed in a plain white hospital gown. Her hair was long and dark, tangled as though she hadn't combed it in days. She was hunched over, mumbling to herself in a language I couldn't understand. I took a step back, my heart pounding. She hadn't seen me yet, but I felt an overwhelming urge to run. I knew I shouldn't be here, that this was wrong. But something held me in place, an invisible force that wouldn't let me leave. I took a shaky breath and called out, "Hello?" The woman stopped. She turned slowly, and when she looked at me, I felt a jolt of terror. Her face was pale and gaunt, her eyes wide and vacant, like she was staring right through me. She looked like she hadn't slept in days, maybe weeks. And then, in a voice that was barely a whisper, she said, "They're coming for you." I stumbled back, my mind reeling. What? Who's coming? But she just shook her head, her eyes distant, unfocused. They're always here. They're always watching. I felt a chill run down my spine. I wanted to leave, but my legs wouldn't move. It was like I was trapped in a nightmare, unable to wake up. I could hear distant footsteps, the faint sound of laughter echoing through the hallway. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the vision faded. The room was empty again, dark and decaying, just as it had been before. Claire was there, her face pale and worried. "Emily. Are you okay?" she asked, shaking my shoulder. I blinked, trying to process what had just happened. I could still feel the chill of the woman's gaze, the echo of her words lingering in my mind. "Why yeah," I stammered, my voice barely audible. I think so." But deep down, I knew that something was very wrong. That woman, that room, it had been real. I had seen something, felt something that couldn't be explained. I didn't tell Claire about the vision. I didn't tell her about the woman's warning. I just wanted to get out of there, to leave the asylum and never come back. But as we walked back toward the entrance, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. As we reached the main hall, I glanced over my shoulder one last time. And there, in the shadows, I saw a figure, a pale, ghostly figure, watching us with hollow eyes. I didn't tell Claire. But I knew, deep down, that whatever was haunting St. Mercy's wasn't going to let us go so easily. We left the asylum that night in silence, each of us lost in our own thoughts. I didn't mention the vision I'd had to anyone, but I couldn't shake it from my mind. The woman's face haunted me, her words echoing in my head. "They're always here. They're always watching. That night, I barely slept, tossing and turning as fragments of the vision replayed in my dreams. The next day, we met at a nearby diner, still shaken but trying to laugh off our fear. Claire and the others talked about their own experiences, the unsettling noises they'd heard, the strange shadows they thought they saw. But when they asked me about what I'd felt, I only nodded, saying I'd been as creeped out as everyone else. I wasn't ready to talk about what I'd seen. I didn't even know how to explain it. But deep down, I knew I needed to go back. There was something about the asylum that wouldn't let me go, some force that was pulling me back. I told myself it was just curiosity, that I needed to find a logical explanation for what had happened. But a part of me knew it was more than that. So that night, after the others had gone home, I found myself driving back to the asylum alone. The moon was full, casting an eerie glow over the building as I pulled up. My heart was pounding, but I felt a strange calm settle over me as I approached the entrance. I knew I was taking a risk, that this could be dangerous. But I had to know. I had to understand what had happened. As I stepped inside, the air was thick with silence, broken only by the faint creaking of the floorboards under my feet. The flashlight in my hand cast long shadows on the walls, and every sound seemed amplified in the empty corridors. I made my way back to Ward 3, the place where I'd seen her, the woman with the hollow eyes. As I reached the door, a strange sensation washed over me, like I was stepping into another world. I pushed the door open, half expecting to find the room as it had been before, filled with the remnants of a forgotten past. But the room was empty. Silent. Just a dark, decaying space with peeling paint and broken furniture. I took a deep breath, feeling a mixture of relief and disappointment. Maybe it had just been my imagination. Maybe I'd just let my fear get the best of me. But as I turned to leave, a cold gust of air swept through the room, and suddenly I was transported again. The walls shifted, the air thickened, and I found myself back in that same vision, the room as it had been in the past. Only this time, I wasn't alone. I saw figures around me, doctors, nurses, patients, all moving in silence, their faces blank and lifeless. They walked through the room as though I didn't exist, their eyes staring ahead, lost in their own world. And then I saw her, the woman from my vision. She was standing in the corner, her gaze fixed on something I couldn't see. I took a step closer, my heart pounding. I could feel a strange energy radiating from her, a sense of pain and despair that was almost overwhelming. What happened here? I whispered, not expecting an answer. But she turned, her hollow eyes meeting mine. They took us, she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. They took us, and they never let us go. A chill ran down my spine. I didn't know what she meant, but the fear in her voice was unmistakable. Who took you? I asked, my voice trembling. But she didn't answer. Instead, she reached out a hand, her fingers brushing against mine. I felt a jolt of cold energy, like I'd been struck by lightning. And suddenly, I was somewhere else. I was standing in a hallway, the walls lined with doors. Each door was closed, but I could hear muffled voices behind them, whispers and screams that filled the air with a sense of dread. The woman was beside me, her hands still on mine. "They kept us here," she said, her voice filled with bitterness. "Locked away. Forgotten. No one ever came for us." I looked around, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The hallway seemed endless, stretching out into the darkness. I could feel the weight of the place, the sense of hopelessness that hung in the air. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. She turned to me, her hollow eyes filled with a sadness that was almost unbearable. "Because you're the only one who can see us. The only one who can hear us." I felt a pang of guilt, like I was responsible for their suffering. But I didn't understand. What do you want me to do?" "Help us," she said, her voice trembling. "Help us find peace." I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how I could help her, or what I could possibly do to change the past. But as I looked into her eyes, I felt a strange sense of determination. I didn't know what I was getting myself into, but I knew I couldn't walk away. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the vision ended. I was back in the room, alone, the cold air pressing down on me like a weight. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. I didn't know what had just happened, or what I was supposed to do. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't alone. As I left the asylum that night, I felt a strange sense of resolve. I didn't know what lay ahead, or what I would find if I returned. But I knew that I couldn't ignore the voices I'd heard, the souls who had reached out to me from beyond the grave. They were counting on me. And I wasn't about to let them down. When I got back home, sleep didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that woman's face, heard her voice pleading with me, felt the icy touch of her hand. The memories lingered, tugging at my mind, a heavy sense of duty settling over me. I knew what I had to do, though I couldn't quite explain it, even to myself. The following evening, I gathered my courage and drove back to the asylum once again. This time, I brought supplies, my camera, a recorder, a flashlight, and, as ridiculous as it felt, a notebook for documenting anything I found. I wasn't sure what I'd encounter, but I needed to be ready. The unsettling visions, the voices, the lingering spirits, I was determined to understand them, maybe even help them find peace. As I walked through the crumbling hallways, I tried to recall everything the woman had shown me. I remembered the hallway lined with closed doors, the whispers and screams behind them. I knew the spirits were trapped somehow, bound to this place by their suffering and fear. I headed toward Ward 3, the place where I'd first seen the woman, hoping she might appear again. The air was thick, almost suffocating, and the shadows seemed to stretch and shift around me. I could feel the presence of something, or someone, watching me from the darkness. "Hello." I called out, my voice echoing through the empty halls. "If you're here, please. I want to help." The silence was deafening. I took a step forward, my flashlight flickering slightly. Then, suddenly, I heard it, a faint whisper, barely audible, drifting through the air like a breeze. "They're coming." The voice was unfamiliar, different from the woman I'd seen before. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. "Who's coming?" I whispered, not sure if anyone could hear me. But the voice didn't answer. Instead, the air grew colder, and I felt a strange sensation, like I was being pulled somewhere. I stumbled forward, barely able to keep my balance, as the hallway seemed to twist and shift around me. The walls blurred, the floor rippling beneath my feet, until finally, everything snapped back into focus. I was in a different part of the asylum, a place I hadn't seen before. The walls were lined with old medical equipment, rusted and broken, covered in dust. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and I could feel an overwhelming sense of dread pressing down on me. And then I saw her, the woman from my vision, standing at the end of the hallway. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow, but there was something different about her this time. She looked afraid. "They're coming," she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. "You have to leave." "Wait." I called out, taking a step toward her. "I don't understand." "Who's coming?" But she shook her head, her eyes wide with fear. "You don't belong here. They won't let you go." A chill ran down my spine. "Who won't let me go?" She didn't answer. Instead, she turned and began to walk away, her figure fading into the shadows. I tried to follow her, but my legs felt heavy, like I was wading through water. The air grew colder, and I could feel a strange energy filling the room, a presence that was both familiar and terrifying. And then, out of the darkness, I saw them, figures moving toward me, their faces obscured by shadows. They walked with a slow, deliberate pace, their eyes fixed on me, unblinking and cold. Who are you?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. One of the figures stepped forward, his face coming into focus. He was an older man, his skin pale and his eyes hollow, like he'd been drained of life. He looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and disdain, like I was some kind of unwelcome intruder. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, his voice low and cold. "This place is ours. It always has been." I took a step back, my heart pounding. I didn't mean to intrude. I just wanted to understand what happened here. The man's eyes narrowed. "You think you can understand us? You, who have never known suffering, never felt the weight of despair." I felt a pang of guilt, but I didn't know how to respond. I want to help you. To give you peace." The man laughed, a hollow, bitter sound that echoed through the hallway. "Peace? There is no peace for us. Not in this place." I opened my mouth to speak, but before I could say anything, the other figures began to close in around me, their faces twisted with anger and pain. I could feel their hands reaching out, their cold fingers brushing against my skin, filling me with a sense of despair that was almost overwhelming. "You don't belong here," the man said, his voice filled with a cold finality. "Leave. And never return." The world spun around me, the walls closing in, and I felt myself being pulled back, away from the asylum, away from the spirits that haunted its halls. The last thing I saw was the woman, her face filled with sorrow, her eyes pleading with me to leave. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. I found myself outside the asylum, the cold night air filling my lungs as I gasped for breath. I looked back at the building, its dark silhouette looming over me like a specter, a reminder of the horrors I'd just witnessed. I knew I couldn't go back. Not after what I'd seen, what I'd felt. The spirits of the asylum were trapped, bound to the darkness that filled its halls, and there was nothing I could do to help them. As I drove away, I felt a strange sense of relief, mingled with a lingering sadness. I'd wanted to help, but I knew that some things were beyond my control, beyond my understanding. The spirits of the asylum would remain, trapped in their own personal hell, forever bound to the place that had been their prison. And as much as I wanted to forget, I knew that I would never truly be free of them. The memory of their hollow eyes, their cold, lifeless touch, would haunt me for the rest of my days. Because some places are meant to be left alone, their secrets buried in the darkness, their ghosts left to wander in silence. And the asylum was one of those places.